Ron couldn't focus on work. His mind kept replaying the shocking news he had received earlier about his wife, Nancy. The seemingly perfect life he cherished had come crashing down just hours ago. Bill Jacobs, a colleague he considered a friend, had broken the news at the bar near the office. "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Nancy's been seeing someone else," Bill had said, his voice low as he nursed his beer. Ron's first question had been natural. "How do you know?" Bill had explained that he overheard a conversation in the men's room at the lab. Some guys had boasted about their encounters with Nancy at a recent company party. That piece of information clicked for Ron. 2 weeks ago, at the company event, Nancy had disappeared for a couple of hours, returning with a weak excuse about a tour of the new facility. Ron was stunned, but not entirely surprised. It made sense now. So many little things had never quite added up. Bill had expressed his sympathy and concern, reminding Ron to keep his cool. Ron, though hurt, reassured his friend he wouldn't do anything rash. After a moment of silence, Bill had stood, offering his support, before leaving Ron to process everything. Alone now, Ron sank into his thoughts, replaying the last 2 years of his life, trying to make sense of it all. Ron Black, often referred to as Ronnie in his family, had always felt out of place. The youngest of 4 siblings, he was smaller than the others, both in size and strength. Standing just 5 to 7 inches and weighing 145 pounds, he was frequently teased as the runt of the family. Even his body never fully developed, leaving him physically weaker than most men his age. Despite his mild nature, which made him an easy target for ridicule, Ron never let his family's mockery shake his confidence. His brothers, John and George, especially enjoyed making fun of him, while his sister Lisa would sometimes join in, though she wasn't as cruel. Even his parents, especially his mother, often made him feel inadequate. "Why can't you be like the others?" his mother would say when he refused to join his brothers outside to play. Ron's response was always the same. "Because I'm not like them." He preferred reading books to playing sports, and he wished they would do the same. His only ally was his grandfather, Mark, who recognized Ron's unique intellect and supported his passion for learning. By the time Ron was 12, he had read every book in his grandfather's vast library, which included everything from classic literature to science texts. His favorite story was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a tale that sparked his interest in the complexities of human nature. At school, Ron stood out. While other kids struggled with basic reading, Ron tackled novels like War and Peace and devoured books on chemistry and biology. His grandfather, impressed by his grandson's abilities, had him tested, and the results were astounding. Ron's IQ was 215, higher than that of Einstein or Hawking. His exceptional score earned him a spot in Mensa, even though he was well below the minimum age requirement. This achievement marked the first time Ron felt truly happy and accepted. Mark, proud of his grandson, encouraged his studies further, even buying him advanced textbooks on various subjects. Ron quickly became fluent in several languages, including Greek and Spanish, as well as Klingon, just for fun. His family, however, continued to criticize him. His father, Bob, complained that Mark was spoiling Ron, and his brothers mocked him for spending so much time in his books. At school, Ron's advanced knowledge often led to awkward situations. Once, during a Shakespeare lesson, when asked about his favorite line from Hamlet, he responded in Klingon. His teacher was confused, and the other students laughed. Ron, who had memorized the entire play, explained it was the Klingon version of "to be or not to be." His teacher was not amused and threatened to send him to the principal if it happened again. At home, his siblings teased him relentlessly, and in a rare moment of anger, Ron snapped, speaking in Klingon, "Today is a good day to die." His brothers, uneasy, avoided him for weeks after that. Mark continued to support Ron, buying him more textbooks and fostering his curiosity. Eventually, Ron became bored with traditional schooling, easily acing every test. Seeing this, Mark arranged for Ron to take the high school diploma test early. Ron passed with flying colors, impressing Dr. Williams, the local superintendent. This led to Mark pushing for Ron's admission to MIT, where he was accepted despite his young age. Ron's family, however, wasn't as thrilled. His brothers, John and George, belittled him for thinking he was better than them, and his parents offered little support. Only Lisa, his sister, gave him a brief hug before he left for MIT with Mark. As they drove away, Ron questioned why his family hated him. Mark explained that his brilliance intimidated them, making them feel inadequate. "They don't hate you, Ron. They just don't understand you," he said. At MIT, Ron thrived. Though the other students kept their distance, some befriended him. He was financially supported by a fund Mark had set up, which allowed him to focus on his studies and even invest some of his money. In addition to his academic pursuits, Ron embarked on a personal research project. Fascinated by the works of Robert Louis Stevenson and his interest in biology, he began exploring how science could help people like him, physically weaker individuals, without resorting to dangerous or unnatural means. Ron's research led him to Dr. Franklin Steiner, who had explored the concept of an inner beast that could be brought out in certain situations to help people overcome extreme challenges. Steiner's theory suggested that a person's alter ego could surface when needed, but Ron was skeptical. He believed that a more permanent solution was possible, one that could give individuals an edge without the negative consequences. Though his ideas were still in the early stages, Ron knew he would continue to explore them. He had big plans for the future and was determined to make a difference, confident that his genius would one day lead to groundbreaking discoveries. By the time Ron turned 18, he had already earned his first doctorate and was halfway through his second, an accomplishment that shocked almost everyone. He'd also achieved a black belt in karate, not just for the self-defense, but for the mental and physical discipline it provided. Mark, however, wasn't surprised by any of Ron's achievements and celebrated them all enthusiastically. Mark was always present for Ron's ceremonies, but his family, as usual, didn't show up. Ron had tried reaching out to them during his time at MIT, but gave up after never hearing back. Not a single card for his birthday or Christmas. Mark, on the other hand, never forgot. Meanwhile, Ron began his job hunt, sending out resumes and doing Skype interviews. He received several offers, but after careful consideration, he chose to join a renowned pharmaceutical company with a top-tier research facility, located just a half hour from home. It came with the best salary package, too. Around the same time, Ron met Nancy, a waitress at a local diner he frequented when he needed a break from campus. After a while, he finally asked her out, and to his surprise, she said yes. She wasn't his first girlfriend, but Nancy was different. She was impressed by his academic achievements and potential, and though she loved the idea of being with someone successful, she genuinely fell for him over time. Ron, too, found himself deeply in love with her, especially when she accepted his marriage proposal, helped along by a large diamond ring. Mark, of course, was happy for them and made sure Ron had considered all aspects of the relationship. "You might want to think about a prenuptial agreement," he advised, "just to protect both of you." Ron, agreeing, let Mark's lawyer draw one up. It was fair but protective, outlining what would happen in case of a divorce or infidelity. Nancy signed it without much thought, as Ron explained, "I'm not planning anything, but you know half of all marriages end that way." As the wedding neared, Mark bought them a 2-story home, complete with a basement that Ron had always wanted for his own lab. Ron offered to pay, but Mark insisted it was a gift. The house was simple but comfortable, and Ron was eager to start his life with Nancy. The next few months went by in a blur. After receiving his second doctorate, Ron moved Nancy into their new home. When they stopped by to visit his parents, he was met with cool indifference. His father barely spoke to him, only commenting on his slim build, while his mother apologized for not keeping in touch. His brothers, George and John, didn't offer much more than rude smirks and crude jokes about his relationship with Nancy. Nancy was mortified by the comments, but Mark stepped in, defending Ron. "Show some respect for your brother's fiancée," he scolded them. When Ron quipped about their lack of ambition, the tension only grew. Later, after a tense visit, Ron confronted his parents about their absence from his life. His father shrugged it off, and his mother offered excuses. Ron's brothers, George and John, seemed more interested in mocking him than acknowledging his accomplishments. Ron's irritation boiled over, but he kept it in check. When Ron asked if they would attend the wedding, his mother promised they would. He told his brothers to at least shower and wear clean clothes. George, still smirking, shot back, "Remember what I said when you left, Squirt?" Ron shot back, "I never forget. Remember that?" Mark could see how uncomfortable the visit had made Ron. Outside, he reassured him, "They're your family for better or worse." Ron wasn't sure he wanted them at his wedding after the way they'd treated him, but Mark advised him to think it through. "They're family, Ron," Mark said. "Good, bad, or indifferent." Later, Ron reached out to Lisa, his sister, who had moved out years ago. She was living independently, working and going to school to become a nurse. When she arrived at their new home, she surprised Ron with a casserole, saying it was his favorite childhood dish. Her warm welcome softened the sting from the rest of the family. She was happy for him, and it was clear she had matured. "I'm glad you're doing well," she told him, referring to his new job. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Ron said. though he couldn't shake the bitterness he felt toward his parents. "But it's been hard, you know. I've tried, but nothing from them." Lisa sighed. "I'm sorry, Ron, but things change. You have to move forward." Ron appreciated the support. As he sat with Nancy and Lisa, it was clear that things were different now. He was starting a new chapter in his life, but his family's indifference would always be a lingering shadow. However, he realized, with Mark's help and Nancy's support, he was finally in control of his future. Things hadn't been going well for Lisa's parents. A year after Ron left, the factory where her dad worked shut down, and he lost his job. The only work he could find was as a janitor. Meanwhile, Lisa's brothers got hurt playing football and lost their scholarships, so they started doing custodial work alongside their dad. After high school, their parents let the boys stay at home, converting the basement into a place for them to live as long as they helped around the house. That's when Lisa decided to leave. She didn't want to stay in a house where everyone was stuck working janitorial jobs. She had dreams of becoming a nurse, but her dad couldn't afford the tuition. Thankfully, her grandfather helped her secure a student loan, which allowed her to move out. At home, things only got worse. The boys, along with their father, started treating the basement as a party zone. Lisa caught them bringing girls in, and even her dad joined in sometimes. The house stunk of beer and sweat, and Lisa couldn't handle it. Her mom wasn't happy, but after her dad berated her, she stopped speaking up. Lisa believed her mom was afraid to lose the household income if she divorced. Meanwhile, Lisa had started to rebuild her life. She and Ron hadn't spoken much until one afternoon when she invited Nancy to go shopping for the wedding. They spent the day picking out dresses and having fun. Lisa was also glad to see Ron and Nancy getting along, which made her feel hopeful. The next day, Lisa took Ron to get fitted for a tuxedo. During the drive, they talked about old times, and Lisa admitted she'd been jealous of him. She had always felt like Ron was the favored one, especially with Grandpa, and it made her resentful. But now she wanted to start fresh and get to know the person he had become. Later at the wedding, things went smoothly. Nancy's sister stood as maid of honor, and one of Ron's old high school friends was his best man. Mark, Grandpa, walked Nancy down the aisle. When the ceremony was over, Ron kissed his bride, and though there was a moment of awkwardness, it felt right. The reception was lively, with family members dancing and enjoying the celebration. But George and John, as usual, tried to get under Ron's skin. George, always the troublemaker, made a crude remark to Nancy, but Ron calmly stood up to him, asserting his boundaries. For once, George backed off, sensing a change in his brother. Later, Ron received heartfelt congratulations from his parents and Grandpa. His mom and dad welcomed Nancy into the family, and even though things had been tense in the past, the moment felt genuine. As the night ended, Ron and Nancy headed home to start their new life together. The next morning, they would leave for their honeymoon in Hawaii. Nancy giggled as Ron carried her over the threshold, marking the beginning of their journey as a married couple. "Wow," she said, impressed. "You're so strong. Let's go upstairs, dear. I need you with me." Ron smiled, taking his bride's hand and gently guiding her upstairs to their room. Though smaller than his brothers, Ron was still strong and capable. They shared a tender moment as they undressed and settled onto the bed, enjoying each other's company. Ron noticed the tension had eased, and there was a sense of calm between them. He gently caressed her, moving with care and attention as he focused on her comfort and pleasure. She responded warmly, her words expressing how much she appreciated their closeness. As they continued to share this intimate moment, Ron noticed the deep connection they had built, which felt different from before, stronger, more passionate. "I'm so happy to be with you right now," she whispered. Ron smiled and kissed her, both of them savoring the closeness and mutual affection. It felt like a special moment, one where their bond grew even deeper. "Yes," she whispered softly. "I love you, my husband." They eventually fell asleep in each other's arms, content and exhausted after a long, intimate night. "I love you," she murmured as she nestled close to him, feeling safe and cherished. "And I love you, my wife," he whispered back. The next morning, he woke up to Nancy making him feel good. He watched as his loving wife took his Johnson and brought him to peak. After that, she gave him a hot kiss. He noticed that she tasted the same as she had in church the day before. Ron couldn't believe it. Was Nancy really giving someone a BJ at their wedding? He kept the thought to himself, pushing it to the back of his mind. He didn't want to spoil their honeymoon. They spent a relaxing time in Hawaii, making the most of their intimate moments. After returning, Ron dove into his work, focusing on developing new medications. At the same time, he began setting up a personal lab at home to conduct his own research. A couple of months later, Nancy came to him with an idea. She wanted to go back to school for a nursing degree. "I think that's a great idea," Ron replied. "Why don't you sign up at the college where Lisa's going? Don't worry about the cost. Just bring me the paperwork and I'll handle everything." Nancy kissed him, clearly excited. "Thank you so much," she said. "Lisa told me registration starts soon, so I'll sign up tomorrow. The 2-year program costs about $18,000. Is that okay?" "Of course," Ron answered. "And if you want to continue for a longer degree, let me know." Nancy hugged him tightly. "You're the best. I'll make it up to you tonight," Ron grinned. "I'll hold you to that." Over the next year and a half, Nancy's focus shifted to her studies, with many of her classes taking place at night. She often told Ron she was meeting with classmates to study late. Understanding how demanding her program was, he did his best to manage the housework and cooking on his own while she was away. During this time, Ron also spent his evenings in his lab, working on his personal research. He'd set up a fully equipped space and had made significant progress. After experimenting on lab rats, he felt close to a breakthrough. So, he decided to test the formula on himself. The results were immediate. After a few days of small, diluted doses, Ron noticed his muscle mass increase slightly, and he felt more confident. Unfortunately, the effects didn't last long. He realized he'd need higher doses or more frequent injections to maintain the changes. But he wondered about the long-term consequences. Would he become obsessed? What kind of side effects might arise? He decided to test it on his rats a little longer before continuing. Meanwhile, Ron noticed his and Nancy's intimacy life had slowed down. She was always tired, complained of headaches, and frequently stayed out late. When he tried talking to her about their decreasing intimacy, she would snap, blaming her intense study schedule. Still, Ron couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, he confided in Lisa, now a full-time nurse. "Have you noticed how late Nancy's been staying out? It's like she's gone every night until after midnight. Is this normal for the program?" "Yeah, it's tough," Lisa explained. "A lot of late-night studying, but it's totally normal." "Why do you ask? Do you think something else is going on?" Ron hesitated. "I don't know. I don't want to accuse her of anything without proof." "You're smart not to jump to conclusions," Lisa said. "But just give her some time. She's under a lot of pressure. Things will settle down, I'm sure." "I hope so," Ron replied, though doubts lingered. A few weeks later, at a company event, Ron couldn't find Nancy. He searched for her for a while, but when she finally appeared, she seemed unusually evasive. "Where did you go?" he asked. "Oh, I just took a tour with some of your coworkers," she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. Later that night, when they were home, her behavior seemed strange, more passionate than usual, but with a peculiar taste in her kiss. Ron's mind raced. Something wasn't adding up. 2 weeks later, a friend broke the news. Nancy had been cheating on him. Devastated, Ron turned to the one person he trusted for advice. "Grandpa, I think Nancy's been cheating on me," he said over the phone. Mark invited him over to talk. After hearing Ron's story, Mark gave him practical advice. "First, we need proof, Ron. Something solid for court. Do you still have the prenup?" "Yes," Ron answered, still in shock. Mark nodded. "Good. We'll start gathering evidence, and if necessary, we can hire a private investigator. Do you still have the spare key to your house?" Ron handed over the key. "Yeah, I do. We'll set up audio and video surveillance in the house. You need to stay calm and act normal for now," Mark advised. "No confrontations until we have the facts." "I won't do anything rash," Ron promised. After Mark's guidance, Ron decided to install a hidden camera in their bedroom, thinking that if Nancy was doing anything suspicious, he would have proof. Meanwhile, he continued his experiments in the lab, where the formula was showing even more promising results. This time, after injecting himself, he noticed longer-lasting effects with no apparent negative side effects. It felt like a breakthrough, but he wasn't ready to risk pushing it too far. As he worked, Ron reflected on the situation with Nancy. He knew he couldn't trust her anymore, but he was determined to find out the truth, no matter where it led. Ron quickly finished his shower, heading back upstairs to lock the security doors to his home laboratory. He had about 30 minutes before Nancy would be back. But that evening, she surprised him by arriving home 15 minutes earlier than usual. "Hey, stranger," Ron said with a smile as she entered. "Good to see you home early." He gave her a warm embrace, feeling the comfort of being together. After a moment, she pulled away, clearly surprised. "If that's the welcome I get, I might just make it a habit," Nancy joked. "What's got into you?" "I just missed you," Ron replied. "How was school today?" It was good, just a lot of review. I've got tests coming up, she said, looking tired but still upbeat. Well, then, why don't we review something else? Ron said, playfully lifting her off the ground as he smiled. Surprised, she laughed. Like what? She asked. Like, remember our honeymoon? He teased, starting to walk toward the stairs. Oh? Nancy's curiosity piqued as Ron carried her up to their bedroom. You're feeling frisky, huh? You bet I am, he said. I've been thinking about you all day. He set her down gently on the bed and started to undress, his heart racing as he tried to savor the moment of connection. Nancy followed his lead, teasing him playfully with her movements. You really think you can handle me? She asked with a grin. I've been working out, Ron replied, his tone confident, and I'm definitely ready for you. As she looked at him with curiosity, she noticed a change in him, not just physically, but something in his demeanor, something more intense than before. Something's different about you, she said, her voice tinged with surprise. I've been putting in some effort, both in the gym and, well, in other areas, Ron said, shrugging off the comment with a grin. But right now, I want us to focus on each other. They shared an intimate moment, but as the evening wore on, Nancy began to notice that something was off. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ron was acting differently, more assertive, more sure of himself in a way she hadn't seen before. The next day, after a long day at work, Ron returned home and checked his lab security camera footage, which he had set up discreetly earlier. He didn't expect to see anything unusual, just routine, his thoughts on Nancy, work, and his latest research project. But as he skimmed through the footage, he noticed something unexpected. Just after he left for work that morning, the camera picked up a conversation in their bedroom. Nancy, looking uneasy, was talking with some of his family members, his father and two of his brothers. I don't know, things just seem different, Nancy was saying. Ron's acting strange, more confident. It's like he's a different person. Are you sure? His brother George asked. I'm not sure what to think, Nancy replied. It's like he's stronger, more intense. I don't know if I can handle it. Ron felt a surge of emotion, wondering what was really happening behind his back. He had sensed that something wasn't right, but this confirmed his suspicions. Nancy had been confiding in his family, and whatever was happening in their relationship was more complex than he had imagined. The video continued to record, but Ron couldn't bring himself to watch more. Instead, he decided to confront Nancy directly, not knowing what he would uncover or how things would change between them. So what, we just forget about our plan to get him to raise the child, thinking it's his? John asked. I think we should put that on hold for now, she replied. I want to finish my schooling and get established first. Once I have a job with benefits, we can revisit it. Forget that, George said. I don't want to wait that long. He looked at his father. Maybe we should consider an alternative. Bob nodded. Nancy looked at them confused. What do you mean, an alternative? She asked. Well, if we can't get the result we want through manipulation, we'll make sure he's in a position where it's clear he's being taken advantage of, John said, and we'll get it all on tape. Yeah, and then we send it out to his boss and coworkers, George added. Let's see how long he keeps his job after that. The men shared a dark laugh. You can't be serious, Nancy said. Oh, we're serious, John said, and you're going to help us set him up. What? Nancy asked, stunned. Yes, George replied, but we're not involving anything you'd be uncomfortable with. We know people who can help us get him in a compromising situation. Trust me, he won't be able to escape it. And you will help us, John insisted. What if I don't want to? She asked, her voice shaking. Well, then we'll just have to tell him about your wedding day, John said, about how our seed was in your mouth when he kissed you. The three men laughed at that. Then we'll show him a video of you making the three of us happy. Do you think he'll ever want to touch you? Nancy looked away, confused. Nancy hesitated. What about your grandfather? She asked. He won't just let this slide. Yeah, George replied. He's holding the mortgage. We'll be on the streets, or worse, in jail before long. Leave Big Daddy to me, Bob said, cutting them off. George and John exchanged knowing looks. John smirked. So, what's it going to be, Witch? You in? Or do we need to show you what happens to girls who mess with us? We could drop you in the wrong part of town and see how long it takes to turn you into a crack hoe. Just don't hurt him, she pleaded, her voice shaking. When are we doing this? Soon, George said. We'll fill you in later. For now, just keep up the act. Be the perfect wife. We don't want him getting suspicious. Nancy nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she whispered. Good, George said, unzipping his trousers. "Now do it, witch," he added. She started, then the other men joined in. The 3 men grunted as they emptied their seed in her. Then they swapped places and did it again, swapping one more time so that all 3 got good use of all her holes. Ron was disgusted by what he saw and felt like throwing up. After the men finished, they dressed and headed out. Before leaving, John shot Nancy a final warning. "Remember what we talked about, witch," he sneered. "And don't let him touch you again this week, or else." With that, Nancy was left alone. Ron watched as she broke down, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. The video ended when she finally dragged herself up and went to the bathroom. He copied the footage onto a thumb drive, realizing he had just witnessed a crime in the making. He pulled out his phone to warn Mark and call the police. But just as he was about to dial, his phone rang. It was Lisa. He answered immediately. "Ron, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to get to the hospital, now." "What's going on?" he asked, his pulse quickening. "It's Grandpa," she replied, barely holding it together. "He's been shot. He's out of surgery, but the doctors don't think he'll make it. Please, hurry." Ron hung up and ran up the stairs, locking the security doors to the lab. He sped to the hospital and met Lisa in the ER. She led him to the recovery room where Mark lay unconscious, connected to tubes and wires. His vitals were dangerously low. "What happened?" Ron asked, his voice strained. "Police say it was a drive-by," Lisa explained. "He got caught in the crossfire between 2 gangs. He was shot multiple times. It's not looking good." Ron pulled up a chair and sat next to Mark, keeping an eye on his vitals. Lisa leaned her head on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. He wrapped his arm around her, trying to comfort her. Suddenly, Mark's body jerked and his vitals flatlined. A code blue alert sounded and medical staff flooded into the room. Ron and Lisa stood aside, watching helplessly, as the doctors worked frantically, but it was no use. Mark was gone. A doctor confirmed the time of death, and the staff unplugged the machines before covering him with a sheet and leaving the room. Ron collapsed to his knees beside his grandfather's body, tears pouring down his face. Lisa sobbed alongside him, her hand on his shoulder. As the grief consumed him, a burning rage began to rise within Ron. He couldn't hold it back. He stood and let out an anguished scream that echoed through the sterile room. Lisa stepped back, shocked by his outburst. A couple of nurses rushed in, but Ron had already calmed down. "I need to get out of here," he muttered, wiping his eyes. "I'll call you tomorrow." Lisa, visibly shaken, nodded. "Please do. I'm worried about you, Ron." Ron left the recovery area and was met by his father and brothers outside. "What's going on?" Bob asked, noticing his son's fury. Without warning, Ron grabbed Bob by the collar and slammed him against a truck. "Don't act like you don't know," he snarled, his eyes wild. "I swear, Ron, I have no idea," Bob pleaded wide-eyed. "If I find out you had anything to do with Grandpa's shooting," Ron growled, "I'll make you regret it." Bob stammered, shaking his head. "No, Ron, I swear I didn't." Ron dropped him back to the ground, his fury not subsiding. George tried to swing at him, but Ron responded with a swift roundhouse kick to his face, knocking him out cold. Ron turned to John, his rage barely contained. "You want some of this, too?" John stepped back, terrified. "No, Ron, please, I don't want any trouble." "Then stay the hell away from me," Ron spat. He turned back to Bob. "You taking care of Grandpa's funeral, or should I handle it?" Bob stood up, shaken. "I'll do it. I'm sorry, Ron. I know how much he meant to you." Ron glared at him one last time before walking away. He called his boss, requesting bereavement leave. "I'm so sorry, Ron," his boss said. "Take the next 5 days. We've got it covered." "Thanks," Ron replied, hanging up. He got into his car, his mind swirling with thoughts of vengeance. He vowed that everyone responsible for this would pay. As he drove, part of his mind went over scientific formulas, and part of it focused on the road. A wicked grin spread across his face as he hatched a plan. Once home, he turned off all the cameras, then retreated to his lab, deep in thought. He confirmed a few things from his previous experiments, made adjustments, and started working on a new concoction. The first solution had to work. There was no time for error. After some time, he had it, the perfect formula. He found what he needed to make the job easier and set it aside. Grabbing a turkey baster, he filled it with the solution and waited. It wasn't long before Nancy pulled into the garage. Ron grabbed the baster and went upstairs to the kitchen where he poured her a glass of sherry. As she entered the house, he smiled and handed it to her. "Is that for me?" she asked, reaching for the glass. "Of course," he said, smiling. "How was your day?" "Busy," she sighed, taking a sip. The pills hit her almost immediately. She stumbled, but Ron caught her and carried her upstairs. He stripped her down and saw the signs of what had happened earlier. Bite marks, and swollen lips. He could tell she'd at least used protection. Laying her on the bed, he positioned her carefully and prepared the baster. He gently inserted the baster, carefully applying the solution. When he finished, he wiped her down, pleased with the results. The pills would keep her unconscious for hours, and the solution would be absorbed quickly. He returned downstairs and crashed in his lab, waiting. The next morning, Ron woke at 6:30, showered, and grabbed a cup of coffee. He was ready. He grabbed his laptop, thumb drive, and left a note for Nancy. Turning the cameras back on, he didn't mention Mark's death. On the way to Lisa's, he called her. "Hey, sis," he said, trying to sound normal. "Mind if I come over and make us breakfast?" "Sure," Lisa replied. "Are you feeling better?" "Yeah, a bit," Ron said. "Got some sleep. I'll be there soon." When he arrived, Lisa greeted him, and he went straight to the kitchen. As he prepared omelets, Lisa asked, "What's all this about?" Ron didn't answer immediately. He pulled out his laptop and thumb drive. "I want you to watch something," he said, setting it up. Lisa put on the headphones and watched the video. Her face grew pale as she took in the images of Nancy with the three men. When it finished, she pulled off the headphones, tears in her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Do you think Dad had anything to do with Grandpa's shooting?" "I thought so at first," Ron said. "But the timeline doesn't add up. There wasn't enough time." Lisa looked at him cautiously. "I heard you got into it with Dad and the others outside." "Yeah, I had a little moment," Ron said, not elaborating. She nodded. "Is Dad handling Grandpa's funeral?" "He said he would," Lisa replied. Ron took a deep breath before asking the question that had been on his mind. "Lisa, I need to know the truth. What happened to make you leave home?" Her face reddened, and tears filled her eyes. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she said, barely able to speak. "It started after you left. It was... Mom and Dad were gone. The boys gave me a drink. And then..." She broke down sobbing in his arms. As she cried, Ron held her, letting her release everything. When she finally calmed down, she spoke again. "It started with the roughhousing. After you left, it was just me at the bottom of the pile. One night it happened. George and John were there, and things just escalated. I didn't realize it at first, but I was sedated." Ron's heart broke for her as she cried again. Lisa revealed to Ron that her offense by John had gone on for over a year, occurring every other week. At first, she had resisted, but John had blackmailed her with compromising photos and videos, threatening harm if she reported him. Ron was horrified, questioning why she hadn't just refused, but Lisa explained that the fear of violence from John and their father, who had started watching, kept her silent. Eventually, Lisa confided in their grandfather, though she didn't tell him everything. She hadn't even told their mother, as their father made sure she remained unaware. Ron, deeply shaken, urged Lisa to consider legal action, though she doubted anything could be done after so many years. The conversation then turned to Ron's marriage. He confirmed his intention to divorce Nancy, and Lisa, apologizing for how she had treated him in the past, encouraged him. Ron thanked her and promised to help with her legal situation. Later, Ron received a call from Marcus Billingham, their grandfather's attorney, informing him of Mark's death. Marcus invited Ron and Lisa to discuss changes to the will. After checking with Lisa, Ron agreed to meet that morning. At Marcus's office, the siblings learned that their grandfather had left nothing to their father and brothers, giving them only $1 each. Ron was named executor, and he and Lisa became co-officers of the trust. Their grandfather had also paid off the mortgage on Ron and Nancy's house, which was now part of the trust. The house their parents lived in was also included, but was mortgage-free. Marcus suggested Ron decide whether to rent it to them. Additionally, Ron and Lisa were informed of a lakefront property their grandfather had been developing into a vacation home. Afterward, Lisa shared the full extent of her offense with Marcus. Ron, enraged, listened as Lisa described how John had mistreated her. Marcus noted that there was no statute of limitations for the crime, but the key issue would be proving it with evidence. He agreed to contact the district attorney and promised to take action. Ron handed Marcus a thumb drive with disturbing footage of Nancy with their father and brothers. Marcus agreed to keep it for future use and assured Ron that the divorce would be simple, especially with the prenuptial agreement and evidence. He also offered to file a restraining order and start the divorce paperwork. Ron planned to confront Nancy that evening. Marcus assured him the divorce would proceed quickly, thanks to the prepaid retainer from their grandfather. The meeting ended with a sense of finality, though the siblings were anxious about the road ahead. At Alfred Johnson's office, the private investigator hired by their grandfather, Ron and Lisa, learned the full extent of Nancy's infidelity. She had been involved with at least 15 men, including Ron's father and brothers. Johnson handed over photos and videos as evidence, including disturbing footage of their family. Ron, resolute in his decision to divorce Nancy, instructed Johnson to end the surveillance. Afterward, Ron arranged for a small apartment for Nancy and paid 6 months' rent up front. Lisa, though hesitant, supported his decision. Meanwhile, Ron felt no guilt. His marriage had long since fallen apart, and the man who would have begged for Nancy to stay no longer existed. Later, Ron went to the bank to separate his finances from Nancy's, canceling their joint credit card and setting up a cashier's check for her. While he packed up her belongings, he received a call from Marcus. The district attorney was interested in pursuing charges, and an interview would likely be arranged soon. Around 3 p.m., as Ron finished his work, he watched the video of his father and brothers from the morning. He felt a grim satisfaction, knowing things were about to escalate. As Nancy and George finished up and dressed, Nancy asked George when they planned to move on Ron. George casually explained they would grab him the next afternoon and liquidate him. Ron overheard and did nothing, though he sensed Nancy's discomfort. Ron then received an urgent call from his mother. His father and brothers had been rushed to the hospital. Ron agreed to meet her there after a quick errand. First, he called Detective Sparks, reporting the murder plot he had overheard. The detective instructed Ron to bring the videos, and Ron quickly packed a thumb drive with the footage. At the hospital, Ron joined his mother, Lisa, and Detective Sparks in the ER. The men were undergoing surgery after severe injuries. Ron plugged in the thumb drive and played the video for the detective, revealing Nancy's involvement with Ron's father and brothers. The detective promised to follow up, stating that they would station officers nearby. Ron explained that his lawyer had already spoken to the DA about Lisa's past offense. The detective assured them he would also investigate the video evidence of the offense. As the family waited, the doctor explained that surgeries had been successful, though Ron's father and brothers would require further procedures. He also recommended Ron be tested for STDs due to the nature of their injuries. Overhearing a conversation in the hallway, Ron learned that there were additional victims connected to his family's actions. He smiled, knowing justice was beginning to unfold. An hour later, Ron and Lisa were taken to see their father and brothers. Officer Green was stationed outside their rooms. Inside, June confronted George, telling him she had seen the video and revealing that she was divorcing him. She made it clear she never wanted to see him again. George tried to shift the blame, but June shut him down, expressing her disgust. Ron, watching from the side, reminded George of the twisted plot to liquidate him and asked about the offense of Lisa. George, unapologetic, blamed Lisa for deserving the offense based on her appearance. The family's world was unraveling, and the stakes were higher than ever. Ron was ready for whatever came next. The fight was just beginning. George threatened to hunt down both Ron and Lisa when he got out, but Ron wasn't intimidated. He mocked George's threats, pointing out that, unlike him, he still had his dignity. A nurse overheard the exchange and, horrified, promised to testify if necessary. Officer Green, who had been listening outside, entered the room and confirmed that he had heard everything as well. Ron then pulled out an audio recorder, playing George's confession. With a smirk, Ron made it clear that the DA would get the recording, and he reminded George that the doctor might have to remove his balls, something that would affect him even more in prison. After leaving George's room, Ron entered John's. He told John that his brother had confessed to their crimes, and he had everything recorded for the DA. Ron pointed out that the doctor had also warned John that he might lose his balls too, a fate he joked would make prison life even harder for him. John's face turned pale with fear. Once they were done, they headed to the hospital coffee shop. June, overwhelmed with emotion, expressed concern about their future. She had no job or income and feared they would lose the house. Ron reassured her, but first, he needed to ask her something important. He asked if she had ever really loved him as a child. June was taken aback, but insisted that she had. Ron, however, revealed the painful truth. He didn't remember her ever showing affection or support, especially during his college years. He never received so much as a birthday card. June admitted that her controlling husband had kept her from showing love to Ron, worried he would become too attached to her. She also revealed that there had been moments of offense from Ron's father, though she felt she had deserved it. Ron was quick to assure her that no one deserved offense, especially not her. In a surprising twist, Ron informed her that Grandpa had secretly paid the mortgage on their house. He had set it up in a trust, making Ron and Lisa the trustees. With that, Ron assured June that she wouldn't lose the house. They also planned to set up a fund to help her get back on her feet. Ron even offered to pay for her divorce. telling her grandpa's lawyer would take care of it. June, overwhelmed by his generosity, expressed her gratitude and sorrow. Ron comforted her, saying that he would always love her despite everything that had happened. June, now tearful, thanked him for his kindness. She also mentioned that Ron was a lot like his grandfather, someone who had always been a positive figure in her life, even though he had never met him. When the conversation turned to Nancy, Ron stated that he was starting divorce proceedings and would be kicking her out that night, assuming she wasn't already in jail. June didn't blame him. Before leaving, she apologized for everything and assured Ron that she did love him. As June departed, Lisa praised Ron for his kindness. Ron admitted that with his father out of the picture, he'd have to take care of Grandpa's funeral arrangements. Lisa offered to help, and Ron gratefully accepted. He checked his watch, reminding Lisa that he had to go home and deal with Nancy, promising to keep her updated. In 2016, a 50-year-old man from Nicaragua required a Johnson amputation after his Johnson became trapped in a bottle he used as a toy. Doctors explained that the lack of blood flow caused the organ to die. In 2019, another man underwent partial penectomy following a painful, prolonged boner that lasted 2 days. Penectomies are also sometimes performed to treat medical conditions or to correct botched circumcisions from childhood. In some rare cases, individuals have voluntarily chosen the procedure. After their embrace, June said she needed to leave, feeling like a mess. She and Lisa shared a brief hug before June left, and Lisa turned to Ron. She thanked him for his kind gesture, and he responded that he'd always be there for her. He mentioned the need to take care of Grandpa's funeral arrangements, especially with his father unavailable. Lisa offered her help, and Ron gratefully accepted, noting he'd need all the support he could get. After checking his watch, he realized it was time to prepare for Nancy's return. Lisa told him to keep her updated and to reach out if he needed anything. At home, Ron changed into comfortable clothes, setting his laptop and briefcase down. He expected Nancy to be out late, but to his surprise, the garage door opened at around 11:30. Nancy walked in, visibly upset, explaining that she'd had a rough day and had just finished speaking with the police. They had been questioning her about a plot involving Ron's possible murder and molestation. Ron reacted with surprise, but his focus shifted when she mentioned going upstairs for a shower before bed. However, Ron had other plans. He demanded she sit down immediately, his voice cold and commanding. Stunned, Nancy hesitated, but then complied, sitting across from him. Ron then played a video of Nancy with his father and brothers, and her expression shifted to one of horror as she realized what he had seen. Desperate, Nancy tried to explain herself, claiming she didn't want to be involved in any of it. Ron's anger flared, and he pressed her for the truth. He confronted her about her infidelity, revealing he knew about the affair that began on their wedding day. She admitted to it, confessing that the affair had lasted for most of their marriage, with multiple instances of betrayal. But she claimed she was coerced, threatened with the release of a compromising video, and manipulated by his family. Ron, now furious, demanded more answers, asking her about other men she'd slept with, including at school and a company event. Nancy seemed taken aback, admitting to several other encounters, though she minimized the number. Ron then dropped another bombshell. He had video evidence showing her with at least 12 men in a single day, with her multiple affairs adding up to dozens more. Nancy defended herself, stating she needed the love to cope with school and life, insisting it was just closeness and hadn't hurt him. Ron, livid, dismissed her excuses, pointing out the risks she'd taken with their health and the trust she'd destroyed. Nancy, once tearful, now appeared more defiant, her demeanor shifting as the conversation escalated. "Okay," she said defiantly. "I admit it. I like to scream, got it? I need Johnson. Lots of it. I love getting two guys at the same time. Until the other day, I never even felt you inside me. Up till then, I was faking it. I only married you to get out of the bumhole, and I loved it for the last 3 hours clubs and spent time with 25 or 30 guys. One of them made a video of it so I can show you. Look at this." She pulled up her dress and Ron could see this. He began to laugh, wondering if his concoction would affect the tongues of the men who performed BJ on her. Perhaps, he thought, it could even affect her rectum. "What's so funny?" she asked. "You should be on your knees, crying your eyes out. You're nothing but a wimp and a loser, and don't even think about a divorce. So I'm going to spend time with anyone. Maybe I'll even do it in front of you." "You stupid," Ron said. Her eyes widened at that. "Yeah, I may have been naive and a bit wimpy once upon a time, but that Ron is gone, never to return. Trust me on that. Did the police tell you about my father and brothers?" Well, they didn't, she said. Well, after they screw you, their Johnson had to be cut off, he said. You gave them a serious case of rotten kitty because it literally liquidated their Johnson. And I overheard a nurse and a doctor say 4 more men had the same thing happen to them. From what you just told me, I suspect there'll be another 25 or 30 men getting their Johnsons amputated as well. Ron had made up his mind. His marriage to Nancy was over, and there was no turning back. After consulting with a lawyer, the divorce papers were ready. He canceled her bank cards, packed up her things, and handed her a key to a new apartment, along with a cashier's check. Everything she was entitled to under their prenuptial agreement. He was firm and cold as he told her she would have to fend for herself from now on. No more support, no more contact. He was done with her. Nancy pleaded, apologized, but Ron was unmoved. She had betrayed him, and there was nothing left to salvage. As she walked out of his life, Ron felt only contempt. The next day, Ron got news that only added to his satisfaction. The CDC had linked Nancy to a bizarre outbreak affecting multiple men, and they were investigating her. Then Lisa called, informing him that Nancy had been hospitalized with severe burns and lesions. It looked like his toxin might have transferred to her, but Ron denied any direct involvement. Still, he couldn't shake the satisfaction that Nancy had gotten herself into this mess. Police were arresting suspects, men who had plotted to harm Ron, and that brought him some relief. Detective Sparks kept him updated, confirming the suspects were notorious offenders and that the case against them was progressing. Ron also learned that the Special Victims Unit was handling Lisa's case, with evidence that she had been sedated and manipulated. Everything was falling into place. Meanwhile, Ron dealt with his grandfather Mark's funeral preparations. Despite everything else, he made sure the arrangements were finalized. Mark had prepaid everything, from the service to the headstone. Ron was also moved to discover Mark's military records, revealing he was a decorated Vietnam War veteran. The VA had prepared a flag for Mark, which he had asked to be given to Ron. It was a small but meaningful gesture, one that Ron would cherish. At the funeral home, the staff had everything ready. Mark had been well respected, and the funeral director anticipated a large turnout. The day came, and dignitaries like former senators and congressmen were in attendance. Ron delivered a heartfelt eulogy, but afterward, he sat alone at the gravesite, overwhelmed by grief. Lisa joined him, offering quiet comfort. They talked about Mark's impact, and Ron reflected on how much he had meant to him. Lisa also mentioned that their mother was grieving but would be okay, and that Marcus was proceeding with Nancy's divorce papers. The 3 men who had wronged Ron were recovering in the hospital, one of them having been castrated. Ron found grim satisfaction in that. Nancy, still under the CDC's watch, would remain isolated for the foreseeable future. Ron wasn't concerned about her well-being, but he knew she'd be out of contact for a while. Detective Sparks updated him on the case. The suspects had confessed, sealing their fate. Lisa's attackers would soon face justice. The next day, Ron's boss told him someone from the CDC wanted to meet. Gordon, a CDC official, informed him they were still investigating Nancy's condition. He asked Ron to help analyze test results related to the outbreak. Despite the potential conflict of interest, Ron agreed, but only part-time and for a limited period. Gordon assured him it was crucial for understanding what had happened. That evening, Ron reviewed his work. The solution he had used on Nancy was designed to dissipate within 24 hours, with no lingering effects. Still, he was cautious. The next afternoon, he suited up in protective gear and entered Nancy's room. She didn't recognize him at first, but when she did, the shock was evident. Ron was there as a consultant to help the CDC, and he wasted no time. He asked Nancy about her recent sexual encounters, pills used, and any repeated contact with men over the past year. He told her that a follow-up panel would be required. Nancy seemed desperate to leave, but Ron explained that the CDC needed more time to monitor her, fearing she might be carrying something contagious. It was a situation similar to the Typhoid Mary case from the past. Ron later analyzed the test results. His initial findings didn't show any issues with his formula, but something troubling emerged. There were signs of a resistant gonorrhea strain, one that could spread without intimacy contact. Even worse, Nancy's biopsies showed early signs of cervical cancer. Ron knew this was bad news. He spoke with Gordon, advising that Nancy be isolated until a treatment could be developed. The new strain could take years to fully understand, and until then, Nancy would need constant monitoring in a secure facility. Gordon agreed. When Ron told Nancy, he was blunt. She had contracted a dangerous, mutating strain of gonorrhea that could lead to cancer. There was no cure yet, and it spread through more than just intimacy contact. Nancy's future was uncertain, and despite her pleading for mercy, Ron remained detached. He couldn't undo the past, but he could focus on finding a solution. "Why?" he asked. "Why cheat on me the day we got married? And why did it keep happening?" "Your dad and brothers pressured me," she replied. "I kind of liked how they controlled me. They mocked you, and that part of me enjoyed it too. Then they came to me with threats, pictures and videos they'd show you unless I did what they wanted. At first, I hated it, but eventually I started liking it. It turned into a game. The more it happened, the more I craved it. That's when I started hooking up with guys at school during breaks. You know the rest?" "Did you mean what you said the other night?" he asked. "At the time, yeah," she answered. "But I didn't really mean all of it. I just wanted to hurt you then. I'm sorry." "You've already said that," Ron replied. "Does this mean you're really going through with the divorce?" she asked. "Absolutely," he said. She nodded. "I get it," she said. "Will I ever see you again?" "Probably not," he said, standing up. "I'll handle your stuff and track your progress, but don't expect to hear from me again. Goodbye, Nancy. I once loved you, but you ruined everything." "Goodbye, Ron, Dr. Black," she said. He gave a small smile and left. Gordon was waiting for him outside the room. "You okay?" Gordon asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ron replied. "I'll keep you updated when she's settled," Gordon said. "I hear your company's leading the development of the treatment. They said you'll be heading it. Good luck." "Thanks," Ron said, walking out. As he drove home, his mind replayed the events. His formula had caused those men to lose their masculinity, but it also led him to discover this new form of gonorrhea. As for Nancy, her actions meant she'd never live a normal life again. The divorce was quick, especially after the judge learned Nancy was the woman whose infidelity led to 40 men having their genitals amputated. The criminal trials of Bob, George, and John dragged on, but they were eventually convicted on all counts, receiving sentences ranging from 35 years to life. George and John didn't last long. Both were found dead in the shower one morning, stabbed multiple times. Johnsonless witch had been carved into their chests. Bob lasted 6 more months before he was found hanging by a bedsheet, though his neck never broke, and he strangled himself. None of the 3 men had family to claim their bodies, so they were cremated at the prison. June's divorce was finalized by the time Bob entered prison. Ron and Lisa set up a trust fund for her and taught her how to manage her finances. 6 months later, Lisa introduced her to a doctor a few years older, and they began dating, marrying a year after. "Take care of my mom," Ron told him at the wedding. With a smile. "I will," the doctor assured him. Mark's estate took nearly a year to settle, but when it did, Ron and Lisa received a significant sum of money. They hadn't decided what to do with all the property yet, but agreed to sell the house after their mother remarried. Lisa eventually married a nurse from the hospital, and Ron walked her down the aisle. They moved into Mark's old house at Ron's suggestion. Ron finalized his formula about 6 months after his divorce from Nancy. He made sure the company couldn't claim any of the profits and began looking for the right customers. Still cautious, he found a men's camp in Idaho where he witnessed a burn the witch ceremony involving a cheating wife burned in effigy. After lengthy talks, he signed an exclusive contract with the camp, hoping his formula would help men like him. Nancy faded from his life, continuing her online courses until she finally finished her training 18 months later. She sent Ron several letters, but when he never replied, she stopped writing. As expected, she developed cervical cancer just 2 years after his evaluation. She underwent a radical hysterectomy followed by chemotherapy and radiation, nearly dying several times. A year and a half after her diagnosis, she was declared cancer-free. Though physically and emotionally drained, she recovered, continuing treatment for the mutated gonorrhea. 2 years after her cancer was treated, a new formula for the gonorrhea strain was developed and approved by the FDA a year later. A year after his divorce, Ron attended a Star Trek convention and dressed as a Klingon for fun. There, he met Belinda, a redhead who also dressed as a Klingon. "Nokia Nekyu?" she asked, greeting him in Klingon. Ron was impressed and responded in the language, though soon she couldn't keep up. They spent the rest of the convention together and started dating. Belinda, like him, was a Mensa member with a genius-level IQ. She worked as a researcher for an aerospace company and had just left a cheating, abusive ex-husband. "I'm looking for someone with brains and brawn," she told him. He shared his story and explained that he was looking for someone intelligent and loyal. "Not only do I know about loyalty," she said with a smile, "I'll cut your Johnson off if you ever cheat." Ron smiled back. They spent countless evenings together, solving puzzles and speaking Klingon. He was happier than he'd ever been with Nancy. Eventually, they fell in love, and one night he proposed. To his surprise, she not only accepted, but insisted they consummate the marriage that very night. After their wedding, they exchanged a kiss, looked each other in the eye, raised their fists in unison, and declared, "Kapla," success.